All right, ladies and gentlemen, welcome to another episode of the Temple Podcast. And today with me, I have the late and great Alec Noisia, and I'm going to crucify this. Oh, there's no way. Gulabovsky? No.
You were fine, but you double pronounced the first. So
Okay,
it's just Gulabovsky.
Gulabovsky. All right.
Yeah.
Well, you know, it had to end somewhere. My streak had to end somewhere on the last
Yeah.
names. Oh man, as soon
It
as
was a
I
good
opened it
attempt.
up,
It was a good attempt.
as soon as I opened it up, I was like, oh no, here we go. This is the one. Oh well. Okay. So, thanks for coming on, mate. How are you doing today?
How are you?
Pretty good, man. Pretty good. It's been a crazy weekend, and we've had a few reschedules, but we're here now. We're doing it, so that's always good. So we'll get straight into it. I usually start off with just your past lineups and your sort of journey through Counter-Strike up to this point. So I think the furthest I went back is Avant for you. But is there anything of note before that lineup that you'd like to talk about?
No, I think the ones before that were all. So I went amateur, intermediate, and then Avant was my first pro team, pro league team. So I think it's probably a good starting point. The ones before that were all amateur.
Yeah, fair enough. Okay, so let's talk about that Avant lineup then. How was your time in that one? Because obviously that was a while ago. That would have been back in the. I'm going to throw out a reference
Around
here.
2016.
Yeah, it would have been. It's like for reference, Moe was on Athletica around that time period. You know.
Yeah.
So, any big takeaways from that lineup there at Avant?
I think our most notable achievement was the Royal Qual. But other than that, we didn't do too much because I think it was. I mean, we called for nats and stuff. We called for I think 3 nats in a 6-month period, and then we went to Malaysia in that same period. But yeah, obviously the team split ways after that trip. I think Iron and Zensky both went to that Atletico lineup.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So, and then after the Atletico lineup, Avant lineup, you then went into Darkside, which that became Rise and Grind, didn't it? After you left the org, is that is correct? The same sort of lineup there with those two teams.
Yeah. It was in reverse though. I think we actually went through a few pub teams. I'm pretty sure in that lineup. I think what Rise and Grind transformed into though, you're right with it being dark-sided, but I don't think it was. God, we went through so many iterations. We were with Jara, we were with Giorgio, we were with SK, we were with Cooper, who's now on Ground Zero, Void. I think we ended up landing on somewhere in the mix of. Because we picked up Cooper, but he wasn't in the Avant lineup. We just wanted a young gun. And then we ended up going with Andy from the FM roster at the time. But yeah, I'm not sure. I'm so bad with that time frame. If it was straight after, or if it was, because I know I went through 2 different Avant iterations before.
We can.
I think.
We can bring it up.
I think it was. I'm pretty sure I went through 2 Avant iterations because I remember we had a Cruden and Inject team somewhere in between there where we versed Kings on Land. I remember there was that BO5 in ESL. But yeah, I'm not sure. I think it was the 2 Avant lineups though before Darksided, because the Darksided lineup came in at the end of last year.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay, so we'll bring up the last match that was played for Darksided, was Andy, Void, SK, yourself, and Lacour. So that was the last sort of iteration of that one, and then Rise and Grind. The last iteration of that was Hazza, Llamas, yourself, Andy, and Lacour. So yeah. Some players changed around. Obviously, Hazza in there on the new Avant lineup, obviously.
Yeah.
So over your time period playing in those lineups, before we get to the breakaway section, who were some like? Did you take away any different styles from players that you were playing in those teams? Anything of like something that you saw that from someone else that you went, okay, I can build off that.
I think the most I probably learned was from James and Moe because they were the two like most experienced players
Yeah.
that I played with. So I think because I had in-game led before that in a lot younger teams, so I would have been the oldest, but I didn't really have enough experience. So I learned a lot playing with those two in particular. So I think that helped my calling a fair bit. I tried to sort of like James will say it now if you ever ask him, but like I feel like a lot of what I learned from James is sort of emulated even now. Like me and him have a very similar thought process, a very similar like play style and how we like look at the game and approach the game. So yeah, I guess that kind of makes sense with him and I being like still involved to this day because we see eye to eye on a lot of things.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, no, definitely still Moe as well. Like Moe, like I reckon his work ethic out of everything was like the most I learned from him.
Yeah.
He told me a lot about the game, obviously, but like his work ethic is something that like I feel like a lot of players can sort of appreciate and like try to emulate and want to sort of replicate that going forward. So yeah, I definitely, yeah, he motivated me a lot.
Just playing with players like that who have that serious motivational grind, does that help you outside of esports at all? Like just in your general life, I guess?
Yeah, yeah, I think so to a degree. I obviously have a lot of things that motivate me, but yeah, I think having people around you like that with common goals and just people who are hardworking helps tremendously, like in a team environment. So yeah.
Yeah, it sounds like obviously it a lot of the time the way I look at certain I guess friends or people that you spend a large amount of time with, which would be obviously certain players in teams. That is a big aspect of Counter-Strike. Even at the that level, you still spend a hell of a lot of time with those four people, right? So those people are going to have an effect on you. So I imagine that somebody who is as motivated as Moe is, and you hear him say, like, the guy's just, I don't know how he does it. The man just keeps going. It doesn't matter what happens. He's going to do what he wants to do, whatever his goal is to achieve. So I can imagine that that would be inspirational in a way.
Yeah, no, for sure. And I kind of use that as like almost like a statement of, well, not a statement, but like a like base point for where I sort of expect people to be at. Because I don't know, I kind of just set the bar high for other people now, having played with like certain individuals. So when I play with other people who maybe aren't as motivated at the start, and then I'm like, oh well, like you kind of have to have like this approach to the game or like this sort of level of motivation if you want to succeed really. So I think it helps like almost grasp your understanding of what you want in a teammate and how you like want to take those parts into your own game. So you want to be that teammate as well.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think that's probably the most helpful part for me.
Yeah, so surround yourself with people of like-minded attitude, I guess. People that are all very motivated to do what it is that they want to do. Did you, when going, sorry, excuse me, when going through those three lineups, was there many things that changed about the style that you play Counter-Strike? Was there, because I know you talked about obviously learning certain things from Moe, but was there like a notable evolution that you went through where you were like where from where you started before those lineups and where you are now?
With CS specifically?
Yeah.
I think reading the game, yeah. Being with more experienced people is going to help you read the game. Like Moe did a really good job and James as well, because we were in the same lineup at a time, so they did a really good job bringing over what they had learnt in their former lineups and their former international experiences and stuff into actually reading the game. So they would break down what's happening rather than just saying like, because I feel like this happens a lot because it's very like a band-aid sort of methodology of like you just do this and this is how it needs to be done rather than trying to like break down the thought process into like trying to help you understand, because that's going to help you a lot more than just telling like someone what to do or even how to do it. You want them to understand why they're doing it as well, you know. And I think that's something that's overlooked because if you teach someone those things, it means that CS being like an unpredictable game and something where you're not always going to have that situation. You're going to have any number of situations. I think understanding why things happen is going to help you be able to adapt in those situations because you can't account for all of them. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
So if you have a good thought process and a good foundation, it's going to just like improve your game like really, really fucking hard, you know?
Yeah. Do you think that there is... So obviously a lot of the times when we talk about like skill sets that a player has, right, you can say, oh, they've got really good aim, or if they're an in-game leader, they've got a really good mind, and then there's also the idea of having really good game sense. And I think that might touch on what you were talking about there, about just knowing, like, I don't know, the timings of how long it takes somebody to rotate over, and if they were there 5 seconds ago, where they are now, those sort of like rotation timings. That oftentimes people talk about how that just takes time, right? You've got to play the game a lot to learn that. Do you think that playing with, I guess, experienced players can help speed up that process of learning that game sense, or is it still just something that is innately you have to learn that by yourself?
I think, well, you touched on like timings and stuff. I feel like a lot of the meticulous things, so maybe things that are more number based and like things that you can sort of like measure, that's something you can do on your own, but things that you can't necessarily measure that need to be explained and like put into words, like the thought processes really. So like, I don't know, anything maybe rotational based is something that you need to understand. Anything that's based on like what this does across this side of the map, or like, you know, exchange of pressure, like things like that, where you're not necessarily going to understand that through watching a demo, because you can't know their comms, you can't know why they're doing this. A lot of it is premeditated, so like they would know that this causes this, and you might not know that even by a server, like just being in a server by yourself, you know what I mean? And a lot of the timings and like utility and stuff like that, you can just learn that by yourself, but a lot of the things where, like those types of things, you need to kind of understand the game to a higher degree, you know?
Yeah. Okay, so where would you say, like, the overall... do you watch International Counter-Strike a lot?
I watched Cologne a fair bit just recently. Before that, though, I can't remember the last thing I watched. I don't watch it like a lot.
It has been...
the only things I'll watch is like demos, really.
Yeah, it has been pretty, I don't know, hectic this year with all the teams not really being all in the same place. Of course, we've just had Cologne, which I'll touch on a bit later. But do you think that... what do you think are the main differences that you see, other than, I guess, pure skill-wise, that you see on that top international level, and then when in just the general local Australian Counter-Strike scene?
Sorry, like the difference of level?
Yeah. So aside from just pure skill level, what are like the main differences that you see between international lineups and then these Australian lineups right now?
That's tough because there's obviously going to be differences with like practice, differences with finance. There's different things that are like it's hard to compare the two because we have so many different like foundations for the actual region. I think the biggest thing that I've seen anyway is people talking about like if we're talking about just purely in the game, I'd say that with the new changes to counter terrorists, I feel like the org being like OP and all that shit. I feel like our T sides are really fucking shit. Like if I was to put it simply, like our T sides are considerably worse. I've even seen that in like top teams that have gone over, like they've been saying like, oh, like our T sides are the part where we're struggling the most.
Yeah.
And I think that does ring true because online, if you're to get an upset, even it's mostly on your CT side, having that good CT side, or if you manage to somehow get some like crazy free rounds, like maybe pull off like an eco and then put them on eco and like break their economy on CT. Like that's really the only way that you're like I've seen that you're getting an upset. Like I feel like that's a common trend if you were to go back and like look at these upsets lately. That like the Avant upset against Order, for example. Like a lot of those upsets you'll see are like either economy based on the T side, so they're breaking their economy on the T side a lot. Because obviously CT economy is going to be naturally worse because all the guns are way more expensive and like the economy changes and all. But yeah, I think T side's anything.
Okay, so the T side is just a lot worse than in that international level. And then obviously you touched there on ecos. Now there is I don't know if you're aware, but there's definitely an ongoing joke in with casters that there's this the Aussie eco is oftentimes very effective against rifles for whatever reason, and sometimes you'll see it seems like teams are winning more rounds with deagles and pistols than they are with actual rifles. So do you have an explanation for why that is? Is there a... Because I've always seen it as it's people go into those rounds with less fear of losing them, I guess, right? So you do crazier things and maybe the skill sort of shines more in those scenarios because people are willing to do crazier plays. But is there anything that you see when it comes to that sort of weird issue that we have with eco rounds?
Yeah, I mean, from a player perspective, there definitely is an element of like caring less because there's less invested, so there's less risk. But I think that on the opposite, like on the opposite face of the coin, I think that being the side who has the stronger economy, you're often going to see people being over aggressive and being overconfident. So I think the two just really meet in the middle where you have this opportunity for upset. If you have overconfidence and sort of like willingness to take risk because you obviously only on pistols, then I think it's almost not expected, but it's plausible to see upsets happen. Approaching the game in that way, I think what you'll see when you watch like a good team approach those rounds is sure they'll like maybe be confident against like a lesser opponent or they'll know their boundaries of like, okay, I can do this aggressively and not be a liability. But I think that maybe things are a bit too aim heavy in those situations where you're sort of just taking like a straight duel by yourself with like no trade or anything. I think that happens a lot. So I put it down to more how you play the round rather than necessarily the people on eco being more confident.
Right.
I feel like the team defending needs to do a better job of making those kills tradable and like really playing it together rather than letting like a deagle or something get a chance of just getting like a clean 1-0 at the start. Because like even if they don't get that done, like you can easily just like if let's say a guy gets a pick out mid on the window guy, for example, then the CTs now have to also like clear middle. Not only do they have like lesser map control, but they've also lost a man. So if the T's were to just leave there and like group back and hit a side, they could even just like end up getting like a 5v1 or something. If like let's say the short play was to move over to help clear mid,
Right. So it's more of a defensive issue than it is, something outlying in the offensive of a Australian eco. It's more like just a lot of the times maybe some of these Australian teams get too aggressive when it comes to those CT defenses, and because obviously they're thinking, it's just a pistol, peek out and one tap to the head. Oh, here we go. Now we're 4v5, and it just sort of spirals out of control from that point onwards.
Exactly.
Right. Okay. So let's segue out of that now, and let's go into that breakaway lineup, because I want to talk about that now. I had you guys, I think at the very end of that breakaway lineup, I had you guys at number 4, if I'm correct about that. I just want to make sure. No, it was number 4, because Tainted Minds AWOL'd, and then you guys sort of took their spot as that number 14. So that lineup was pretty impressive. I think you guys definitely. Who was it? I think it was you and Paradox that people were throwing up to be in that 4th spot, and I think then you just went and beat them. You also had some victories against Order. Is that correct with the breakaway lineup? Yeah. So you guys were playing really well. And then obviously, you know what? Actually, before we get to the split, we'll just talk about that lineup in general. How was the time in that lineup? Because obviously you had quite a lot of success there.
I'm pretty happy with it. Initially, it was pretty good. I think that the mixture of inexperience and experience is almost a necessity these days. I think seeing that where you have older and younger players mixing, even in tier 1 scene. So no, I was pretty happy with the actual roster itself on paper, and the development of the players as well. Not even just the initial. I think my expectations were met. With that team, I helped develop people. They helped develop me. It was good. It was a good process.
Yeah. So
overall.
So you felt like you all moved forward, I guess, in that lineup, right? You were all sort of excelled as players. Okay.
Yeah, I think we did what we intended to do. I think if things went maybe a different way with qualification and whatnot, it might have been different. But in terms of what we achieved, I don't think you could really expect more. Yeah.
So you touched on there about how you thought the youth and the new players aspect played a big part in it. But is there anything else that you look at that say that you would say derive from your success?
Then having that.
Sorry, you broke up there at the start. Can you start that one again?
Yeah. So other than the dynamic itself.
Yeah. So what would you say were the main reasons for the success of that 5-man lineup?
I think it was just the fact that we got along so well.
So just like a good team environment then?
I think that's really what it comes down to, outside the game at least. But if things are going well inside the game, you have a good dynamic. I think the next step is really just meshing as individuals. Yeah.
All right. So you would obviously, some people place different, I guess, weights on the idea of the whole lineup being friends with each other. And I guess, actually, you know what? Maybe if it's a professional level, right? You can look at it as a job and go, okay, well, I'm getting paid to play. I'm going to walk in, do practice, whatever, play the games, and then go and do whatever it is that I want to do. Whereas I would imagine in a lineup like Breakaway, in a lineup like Paradox, in Rewound, you kind of have to have. There has to be a friendship there, right? It has to be all going well because you have to spend so much time there, and it really is about, okay, we're just going to play together and hope that we can develop each other to a point where maybe we get that opportunity to be paid to play.
Yeah, I think if you don't have those things I don't know, because Breakaway was kind of different because we were being paid, but I think it was more lucky than anything. It's not, for me, I'm not saying that it's like a must. You don't have to be friends to compete, obviously. I think it helps. It definitely does help. So in that team, that was a contributor to any success that we had. So anytime we had won or something, or anytime that we had formed a comeback, I think a lot of those grassroots things, like knowing the guy next to you, being friends with him, getting along, it's going to help you. But definitely, like beyond that, where you don't have those things, like uh, if you don't have money tying you together, or you don't have other support tying you in with your teammates, I think it's good that you support each other and that you have that sort of friendship, because you're not going to have those things really impacting your drive as much.
Mm-hmm.
Whilst maybe a team who's doing it like full time or whatnot would have those things being like, okay, like it doesn't matter that me and this guy don't get along together, because at the end of the day, I'm just here to win. But that's all fine and well, and like that's fine even if you're a lower team. But I think what pulls you back in to continue being motivated beyond winning is like, yeah, like you're doing it with someone that you want to do it with, you know.
Yeah. Fair enough. Okay, so let's go to the split then of Breakaway, because obviously at the end of that lineup, you guys sort of split ways. It was Jara and Hazard that left, and then you guys went to Rewound, or became Rewound. So was there what sort of happened there that ended up in that split occurring?
Well, yeah, that was at the end of the IEM qual. Yeah. So that was just after the IEM Sydney quals, and we had come back from boot camp.
Mm-hmm.
So we had obviously, I think it was us and Chiefs in the lower bracket, and then before that, yeah, we dressed Greyhound in the upper bracket, that's right. So we took a map off Greyhound, and then we went to the lower bracket where we versed Chiefs in that grand final. It was like a BO5 or whatever. So we had basically two cracks at it because they were the favourites on both sides. So I guess we wanted to have come out of a win, like out of one of those.
Mm-hmm. So I guess the failure at the qualifier then was the main sort of catalyst for splitting that team up and sort of switching ways.
Yeah, I think the non-qualification, even before that, I think we had times where we felt like we should have brought more results, or
Mm-hmm.
whatever it be, that was just a final hurdle, you know. I think we had upsets, we had map upsets, we had things like that, but we didn't have that last sort of qualification, that last win, that last, to sort of keep it all together. Because at the end of the day, that's all that really comes from those things. So in a way, a team lives and dies by that end result. So yeah, I think that's where it kind of just fell apart, because we weren't achieving as much as we would have liked at the end of the day.
So did you feel like that lineup had reached its apex then? It had done the best it could have done? Because obviously you said before that you were happy with what you achieved in that lineup. Would you say that you were, you now looking back on it, you're happy with how it went and where it got to?
Yeah, I, I think there's times when I would be like, okay, I kind of wish it went like a bit further just to see what would have happened, because obviously they qualified, like Avant qualified in the minor qual, and I feel like with how like the state of anything below the top three is right now, any team with longevity is really going to start reaping like some rewards. I think you're seeing that with teams like Genuine, which have come into form with like they're just sheer longevity. You know,
Yeah.
obviously they've got good players, but I think that's a big factor with teams like anything below the top three now is like literally like just that fucking shitstorm.
Yeah.
So I think longevity would have pushed that breakaway lineup into maybe a position that you could argue where they might have even been in a position higher than the current Vant team. But that's obviously something I'm just going to wonder out of curiosity. Like,
Yeah.
who knows where they could have gone. Same thing with that old Avant lineup. Like, we come back from an international, and like, obviously we perform shit. So that's the thing. So it's like, you go to that international, it's great. Like you are meeting certain things, but you're not going any further, which is kind of like the reason that these teams are dying. So had you gotten that result, just thinking about what maybe could have been, or it's like, all right, guys, like we didn't win it this time, but we're doing pretty well. Like we've made 3 nuts and we've called for an international in 6 months. Like let's just chill. Like we can sort of take this learning experience and then grow it even further. And that's obviously something that I'm going to think about, but I don't think I could have expected any more from the lineups, given our position and what kind of players we were before it.
So you touched on there, obviously, lineups and their longevity, and like you said, we're now starting to see Genuine and the success that they're having, and that it's a rare case generally, right? Apart from the top 3 teams, it's pretty rare, and even sometimes in the top 3, it's pretty rare that a lineup will last a long period of time. Over 6 months is generally like, oh wow, this team's lasting long, but it's, you know what I mean? It's only 6 months. So why is it, do you think, that from a player perspective, and obviously you've been in lineups that have now, that have ended, why is it that you think that teams just sort of end very quickly, and people are so quick to, okay, well, this isn't working now, we've got to move to another lineup? What's your thoughts on that?
I think it is those things where I just touched on about you're not meeting those goals.
Mm-hmm.
I think a lot of people think things will come, but I almost think this is an absolute where people think that things will come a lot quicker than they anticipate. A lot of people, if they aren't hitting those things with the time period that they've given it, or they're not maybe as successful as they initially thought they might have been, that they're not really willing to sort of sit it out. You know what I mean? I think that things often do take longer than you anticipate, but that might be something that people can't really fathom in it. Like you sort of have to just you almost have to keep lingering for that success. Like you have to keep trying to push it forward rather than be patient. I think that's the approach that people are going with, is like, how can I actively go for it rather than being patient, waiting for that sort of thing to happen? Because I think that it's inevitable with longevity. I think that if you have the tools, like obviously it depends on what things are going wrong, but I think if you have the tools, longevity is only going to bring you to that success eventually. So I think people are just more not really on board with being patient rather than trying to push the agenda. You know what I mean?
Right. So it's just it's a patience issue then, and then also people setting goals that may be not necessarily unattainable, but you're trying to run a marathon but sprint the whole way, if that makes sense.
Yeah, almost.
Yeah. So that is obviously an issue that we have, and so after the breakaway split, you then moved into Rewound now, and you guys, I just want to confirm. Let's go to the old XeshTV just to make sure, but you guys right now are ranked on the XeshTV boards at number 8, so just below Genuine, and then Ground Zero is apparently above Genuine. That's interesting. Okay, well, it's XeshTV rankings, but I think you guys are definitely. I think if we go, if there's Ground Zero, there's Genuine. I think you guys are right there. Now, obviously, there may be some exterior issues right now with that lineup, but it hasn't lasted that long. How has the time been in this one, and is there a future moving forward with it, do you think? Is there something you can build with this, or is it kind of like getting to a point now where you need to try something different?
I think it definitely is getting to a point where we have to try something different. Mm-hmm. I think that we have had the things that we've like needed to have in order to have success in that time. Like there's no real reason why we wouldn't have had results before this point.
Mm-hmm.
Like we've had a good five. We've had a coach even like James has been coaching. I'd say pretty full on to be honest, given his schedule. Like he's had a crazy schedule, hence like him stepping down a while ago from playing. So yeah, I think we've had the tools, and if we haven't really achieved success, uh, like now of all things, I think that yeah, I think that there's no real reason why we shouldn't have.
Right. So at this point, it's kind of, I guess, again reached its apex or its finality, and it's now time to sort of move on from that. Obviously, there is definitely some notable players in that lineup. Obviously, yourself, Andy, Keto, Valiants, and Llamas. So yeah, you are right. Like it does seem as though you've got again obviously similar to what we talked about, or at least a similar scenario to what we talked about in the last episode with Order, where you got the right ingredients, but sometimes maybe the recipe's just not there right now, and it's time to mix things up, try something else. So for you, moving forward, what do you think are your next steps?
I think that I've been calling for a decently long time. Um, I don't even think it's my best role.
Yeah.
Like I kind of just I'm one of those callers who gets put into calling rather than wanting to do it.
Mm-hmm.
It's kind of I think someone else mentioned I think it was APOC actually in a previous interview that he sort of got thrown into it. I was like much the same.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, it's not like my least preferred role, but there's definitely things I'd rather be doing. So I think pursuing something on those lines is probably more advantageous for me.
Right. So maybe transitioning out of that in-game leader role and into more of a a more, what's a good word for it? I guess action-orientated role. I don't know if that's even a good. You know what I mean? Like a more brute strength kind of role, I guess. The foot soldier. So
it's funny because like I would actually orientate like how I played even in that thought role into being like something like that where it's like that style where you don't mind going out dying, so then you can ideal from spectate.
right, yeah.
Yeah.
So yeah, that could definitely be, So you're looking at more of a sort of entry role then, I guess.
Maybe not. Like I don't mind playing like.
Oh, sorry,
Like
switching from that.
like, yeah, I don't mind it. Like I don't mind it. I haven't always called in that style either. I think I've probably honestly called the other style, like the traditional style, more often. Sort of like throwing util, supporting other people. I think I've called that more than sort of going in and being the aggressor. So it would be refreshing to play that style just purely without having to think about obviously those things that a caller has to think about.
Yeah.
But I think my most preferred role is probably my grassroots of where I played in like the older lineups, where I was like on wides more. I was sort of just more of a solo player, like more of like maybe like you'd say like a Liaz or something, you know. Obviously not as good as Liaz, but yeah, like in that role, yeah, I find I'm most comfortable.
Right. Fair enough. So yeah. So it's a slightly different role than from what you're playing right now, but it still has, I guess, similar elements, but without the added calling aspect of it, I guess, right?
Yeah. So yeah, it's mostly just relaying like what's happening on your side of the map. So you still have to be vocal because you're by yourself, obviously. But yeah, I kind of like it because it's more of a vocal responsibility that doesn't require you to like micromanage as much as maybe an.
Yeah, it's a scout,
Yeah.
From. Okay, so let's talk. I want to transition now to Cologne, obviously, because that event literally just happened. Was up last night watching that, and then had to work in the morning. So just I have no soul in my body left right now. But fun times, I guess. Liquid took it 3-1 in the end. Vitality took Dust 2. Oh, Jesus, I hope I'm right about that.
Yeah, it was in overtime.
Yeah, they took Dust 2 in overtime. It seems like they're still extremely solid on that map. But before we talk about, I guess, the playoff matches of that group, I wanted to talk to you about, obviously, the Renegades lineup, which is in, I guess, a shaky position right now because, I talked to Pilly before the event, and it was very much, I think, he pretty much called it quite well. Whereas as soon as they lost that first map, it kind of felt like that next best of 3, it was one and done at that point, right? And you get this very neutered lineup that you see very often when it comes to Renegades, which is that sort of very close 16-13. We're right on the edge of getting there. We fall at that hurdle, and now we're out in last place, right? So at this point now, I'm a pretty negative person, I'd say, when it comes to lineups. Listen, I've followed Renegades or Vox Eminor for a very long time now, and sometimes you just get to a point where you get jaded and you go, you know what? I'm not going to believe anymore until I see it on the screen in front of me. So, do you think there's any way at this point now in their lineup that they can get back to what they were at that last major, or do you think at this point in time it's just one and done?
I think, well, I have a philosophy of, if a team or if an individual has made it to a certain point in their skill ceiling, that it's obviously doable again because you've done it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So that's kind of my thought process on it. Having done it, and them having individuals who have done it and have all performed individually, I don't think there's a single individual in that lineup who you'd consider like a weak link.
Yeah.
So with those things in mind, I think that I think it's fair to believe that they could do it again, personally. Whether or not, again, it comes back to that, how long do we give it? Like, how long are we willing to be sitting on this where we might not be getting those results? Like, having that patience of maybe tanking a bit, you know what I mean? Like, your results aren't going to be the best for a bit, and so you hit that form again.
Mm-hmm.
That's something that really they only can answer within themselves and like their team, and like obviously now they have to consider the org, how long can the org sit with this 5 and whatnot. So I think there's numerous factors that comes back to that, yeah. But I think they can do it for sure.
Yeah, so I think like you said, the main issue there is how long do we wait, right? And the Berlin Major's coming up, and I think my worry about it is that, okay, so they're going to go into that, and it's most likely going to be a similar level of performance to Cologne. Listen, if they do better than that, I'm all for celebrating Renegades, but I imagine it's going to be something similar to that, and then especially if they go out in last place of that Berlin Major, because that then, I think if you go out in the bottom 2 spots, you then have to play through that minor again, and that is where it sort of, I feel like, has an impact on the rest of the Australian scene, because a big part of Renegades making into the playoffs is the fact that now we have, there's a new team that can make it through, and this year it's going to be Avant. But do you know what I mean? Like, it's refreshing, right? Oh, okay, we finally got something new here. We can push these teams through. And I've said it before, but I've always sort of seen Renegades. Moe talked about it, that they now have to play through the qualifiers, so it's making it a little bit better. But it's always kind of, I felt, put a cap on how much international experience Australian teams can get, right? Because you just can't. It's like we talk about the top three teams being so far ahead of everyone else, and then you get Renegades who are literally playing international CS on the regular. It's like, man, come on, like it's almost like an, I wouldn't say unbeatable, right? Because they're definitely mortal now, but it does always seem like, oh, if I don't know, what's the fix there? Because I always see that as an issue. But as a player, do you find that problematic at all?
Yeah, I think that the almost the gap, that just the dynamic of how things are set up, the gap is just huge.
Mm-hmm.
Like you can't really, like, I understand it because I think Moe might have touched on it with the dynamic of them having to play in this qualifier. Obviously, like if they were to play in our minor qualifier, it makes sense that they play in the Australian qualifier out of all of them. But it's just how CS is sort of set up where they're in, obviously they're in America, right? So the competition that they're versing and the experience that they're getting and the level that they're progressing just from being like just their little geographic location,
Mm-hmm.
it's something that um, you can't really like measure it to make it an even playing field.
Yeah.
Like it's just naturally like with how things are going. Like when they come back, like let's say they came back and they played in the mine or whatever, or the mine qual, like you can't really even the playing field at that point. Like they just have that advantage, and it's something that you can't measure. It's just the nature of, I guess, the beast. You know what I mean? Like they just will have that advantage, and I'm not sure how you get around that because obviously you can't have everybody just moving overseas. It's just
Yeah.
not viable. But I think that you have to have them playing in the Australian qualifier, but you can't really justify it an even like competition.
Yeah, it's a strange situation because you want the teams in Australia to get, I guess, a higher level of experience, and you want it to be an international, but obviously, like you said, it's not viable that all teams move over because it's like there's not enough money there for every team to fly over to America to play. So you almost want, in a way, okay, our best competition are those top three teams, but those top three teams aren't getting the experience they want to develop.
Right. Yeah.
But if they leave, then all the teams that are below them aren't going to get the experience they need to develop. And it's this crazy sort of circle that goes around that it feels like it's impossible to break unless there is like a big, I guess, excel in the amount, and I hate to go back to this always, but it does feel like there needs to be some sort of boom over here where we get more of these teams, more of these orgs that are willing to pay their players so that they can spend all of the time necessary. And even if it's almost, I'm almost willing to even let it be a bubble of sorts for a while, just to see if it's possible, right? If we get the money in, what happens then? Is everybody correct in the assumption that, okay, now that we all have enough time to play this, as long as everybody else does, do we all go up in skill level? Are we starting to seriously compete at an international level?
I don't know. I think that you have almost in a way seen that where people, well, even like maybe it's just the upper echelon, right, where it's just the top four or whatever that are able to play full time. But I feel like time now is honestly less of an issue than it used to be. And if you were to gauge how influential time was, it would have already happened. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
I'm sure it hasn't affected the top eight, but you've seen enough sample size where, I mean, the success with it, right?
Yeah.
There's obviously been success in the top four. So I'm not saying, like, I'm not downplaying the fact that time has, but I think the effects of time have been measured in a way. So I think the next step to me that you can't measure and that should be almost the next step if the scene is to grow is really the region, like where you're playing from. So that's where I talk about like the location of these teams. Like obviously Renegades have that advantage. Like Greyhounds, I'm sure would want that advantage as well. They'd want to play in those American leagues to have better teams to play against.
Mm.
Which brings me to another point of like how beneficial Greyhounds' practice would even be right now while they're still here. You know what I mean? Because they're coming back constantly from these international events where they're gaining this experience. So I think that while they're still here, teams should be almost reaping that until.
Yeah.
I think it's like as you said, it's a matter of time. It's really sad that the top team does leave because then that information, that experience that you could gain as a lesser team, like as your second, thirds, fourths, whatever, it goes, and that's where the scene starts dying more and more.
Yeah.
The only way that you really branch on from that experience is by keeping it internal or by moving the whole scene, and obviously that's not viable. So
Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah. It does. It seems like a difficult scenario, and you know, that's obviously another. It's like a part that coincides with that Renegades issue is the Greyhounds one, right? Where they're getting to a point now where it's similar to the old Vox Eminar, right? They're not they're probably not at the peak of what Vox Eminar was, but they're starting to now perform at a level where how much more can you gain by staying in Australia, right? And if you are serious about progressing and really making it forward, and it seems like they have the skill level to do so. You always see little glimpses of it every time, every time we go to Sydney and it's in that home sort of ground. You can see the glimpses of okay, there's really something here, but is the region itself, like you said, is the region the problem? Do they need to move over and just go, you know what? All right, it's time. We've got to move over to NA now, and we've got to start playing there.
yeah. I mean, I think you have to.
Yeah.
You get to a point where you have to, and that's why it is constantly this thing where you will have these people who excel within a space, which is the AU region. They're going to excel in a space that like you might say is like, it's argumentative, but I think it's traditionally harder, right? Like because obviously you're isolated, so you're excelling in a difficult environment, and there's only going to be certain people that are going to make it. So when those people do make it, finally, we have these people who are like standing out, competing, they're able to compete even at a disadvantage. They eventually are going to move, and that's going to mean that the scene itself is hemorrhaged from their best competition.
Mm.
So it is just going to affect the whole scene when we have this system of, all right, let's have a team like get really, really fucking good, and then when they get good, they get so good that now we don't have them anymore. So then we almost are like put even further back than we were because we don't have those other teams to look for where it's like, okay, we might have lost this one team, but we've got a shit ton more teams who we can practice against. Like, no, it's like, that was our best experience and we like just lost them, you know what I mean?
Yeah. So this might be an impossible task, but do you think there's a way that we could get the Australian scene to a point where it's similar to the NA team in terms of like level of opponent? Is there something that could change in the future where you could see AU producing the same amount of talent as an NA?
That's tough.
Yeah.
I think maybe how our teams approach practice is more a talking point than giving teams more practice. Because more practice is going to be honestly more effort than a team looking inwards and being like, all right, how can we most effectively use our time?
Mm-hmm.
That's just always going to be a thing. Like time management is huge if you aren't going to be able to compete on pure hours alone. You know, like if you have a fewer amount of hours, or even if you consider factors like a player who's playing in tier one is just going to absorb more information than you in that time, or he's going to be able to use his time better. Like not even thinking about those, but thinking about just the fact that that guy has more hours in the day than you you have to utilize your time so much more. That's not even considering like you two as individuals being on uneven playing fields. You know what I mean?
Hmm.
So I feel like time utilization, people not fucking around in practice more, needs to be sort of pushed because that I don't know what it comes down to because even in those teams there are people who are experienced. They know what needs to happen in order to utilize practice in order to like have success. So I don't know why that is. Why there's so much. Uh, how do you say it? Like uh, almost discrepancies in practice. Like you have a team like Greyhound, and then you have another team here, just like what the fuck is this? Like,
Yeah.
um, yeah, I don't know. I don't know why that is, but I just think that the approach on practice is not good at all.
Mm.
Teams, and that's why you have these things where it's like, well, we can only really verse a handful of teams because these other teams aren't giving us the practice that we need, or like they're not taking it seriously, they're not playing properly. Like they're not going to do this in an actual game, you know. And I'm not sure how much that rings true to international these days, but I feel like that's a big talking point because you can always change hours. You can always say, all right, let's just put more money into it, so everyone in the top eight is full time. Like, but that's not going to really. If you just have 8 hours in a day as opposed to four, let's say, it's not going to mean you're going to be using those 8 hours any better. If anything, you could argue that it'd be worse because you have a longer period of time now where you're probably going to lose focus in, and you're probably going to fuck around more, right? So I think that if anything was to happen in that time, it would be a shorter period of time where you'd be able to excel and use those hours. So I'm someone that believes you need to show me why first before I actually like I like it's you have to like make a reason why you deserve those things. You can't expect like more hours or how have you used those hours, you know?
Yeah.
Like, I don't think there's people who necessarily deserve being on full time. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Fair enough. Just to look at it from a positive light, because of course I feel like I have been pretty negative about it, but I think there is sort of similarities to what happened with Renegades making it to quarterfinals, and then I don't know if you remember this, but the old Cloud9 lineup with Hiko and Shroud and Nothing, and when they made it to the quarterfinals in a major against Dignitas. And I remember, you know, it seeming like, oh, that was it, you know. Finally, NA's going to make it. We're going to finally progress forward. You had iBuyPower playing really well, which is, I guess, well, they're not as... I would say Greyhound are a little bit further behind. So there's probably, you know, the discrepancy between Cloud9 and iBuyPower is probably less than Greyhounds and Renegades. But do you know what I mean? I draw similarities between those that sort of state, and I hope that I might have to. I don't know. I might do a little bit of research and looking into the history there of how they transition from that period into what it is now, right? Because it seems like if there's any region that we can draw from, it's that region, right? That's if we can figure out whatever it was that fixed them, and now you've got Liquid who just won the Intel Grand Slam, 4 events in a row. People didn't think, well, I remember when that was announced, people went, no one's ever going to win that. They just won it 4 events in a row. So, is it 4 or 5? I don't know. You get the point, regardless.
Yeah.
So I hope that we can find a way to do this, but I think, like you said, it is difficult. And right now, yeah, maybe teams and players aren't making the most of their practice hours, right? And maybe having more time, like you said, wouldn't fix that issue, right? Why do you deserve more time? If you're fucking around with the 4 hours that you have now, why should I give you 8? When, you know what I mean? What tells me that just because you have more time now you're not going to fuck around? Like,
yeah, I know that's honestly a point that an organization would make as well, because obviously they're going to see it. They're going to see it from that point. It's very traditionalistic, very like old school to see it. Like what you've seen up until that point is kind of what you're going to get going forward. So why should I invest in that until you've actually proven to me that you deserve those things? You know what I mean? And I feel like orgs are going to see that. They're not going to just want to like part with their cash where they don't see they're going to get a reward. You know what I mean? Like,
Yeah.
it's just logical at that point.
Fair enough. Okay, so we'll just we'll finish off because we are coming up to the hour point now. But we'll finish off with I guess we'll go from the semis of Cologne. Did you watch the semi-finals and the final? Obviously, it was up at like, I don't know, 3 a.m. in the morning. So I wouldn't put it down for on you if you didn't. It is a completely psychotic that I did watch that, but you know what I mean, like.
Yeah, I watched bits of it. Who was it again? It might trigger my memory.
So it was Liquid versus Na'Vi in the semi-final, and then Vitality versus Astralis. So, can I get those matches?
I think I watched like the two. Was it two? I think the Na'Vi game went to 3 maps, but I only watched 2.
Let's have a look, shall we? It was 2 maps.
Okay.
Yeah, there was a 2-0 from Liquid, and it was Astralis versus Vitality was 3.
Oh,
Right.
I didn't watch that much of because the Astralis game was after, right? I remember now. Anyway, yeah, go on.
Okay, so Astralis Vitality was a 2-1 to Vitality. Obviously, they win Dust 2. They're looking lights out right now on that map. And then Inferno seem to kind of just slip their grasp there. I know that the Astralis, I know Dupree said in an interview that he thought that was them sort of getting a hold of the game again, but it did seem more to me like it was a Vitality slip rather than Astralis fixing whatever the issues are right now. And then Overpass 16-9, again, a pretty heavy lead for them. So that was a quick one. Are you done with the Astralis lineup at this point? Do you think they can sort of fix the issues, or is it time for maybe a change?
Oh, they can definitely fix the issues.
Yeah.
I think anyone that thinks otherwise, like anyone thinks that they're a lesser team right now, has kind of lost the plot.
Yeah.
Like them having dominance for so long, I feel like any change right now would just be almost like knee jerk. They're just that would have to come in because you're just so used to winning almost. You know?
Yeah.
Like you've been losing for this small little patch and you've been so dominant, it would not make sense in my mind to make a change.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think that's the interesting part about it is it's so I feel like sometimes people. Now, not to say that I'm not trying to be an Astralis fanboy here and say, oh, they'll be right back to number 1. Don't worry about it. But do you know what I mean? Like, there is definitely people always go to extremes, right? You're either the best in the world or you shit.
Exactly.
It's like, listen, they still made semi-finals of Cologne, and it was a 2-1. Yeah, okay, maybe in the semi against Vitality, they didn't. It was pretty dominant from Vitality's side, but I feel like it is still there. They made it to semis, like Renegades went out in last place. Astralis made it to semis. There's a difference here in the level that we're going down. Sure, they're not absolute light years ahead of everyone else, but they're still definitely in that top 5 contention right now. Yeah. So
I think that just what you said. I think Vitality as well is like literally on the come up. So they're being met in the middle. Astralis is going down, Vitality is going up. You're going to see that result. I think that's normal, to be honest. I just think that maybe now you hit the practice, you reevaluate your options rather than. And when I say options, I don't mean other players. I mean like time to reevaluate like maybe our positions, how we're playing the game, like not, all these internal things, not like. Okay, let's really maybe fuck ourselves up by changing someone. I feel like that's really drastic. Like, as you said, they did make semis. They're still a good team. They have had a shit ton of success. Like, there's honestly no need for that.
And then, so I'll transition now to talking about Liquid, because I think they're the other, obviously, the number 1 team right now. They 2-0'd Na'Vi in the semi-finals. They were close matches, 16-12, both on Dust 2 and Overpass. but I think unfortunately that it almost seemed like it was bound to happen. Somehow Boomlich has top fragged that best of 2-3 series. I mean, that could be a reason right there. Simple 36 and 36. So maybe not performing to the highest level that we're used to seeing him. Obviously, still, it's not bad, but it's just not like carry level Simple where he just dominates the game.
What did they end up placing? They came third, fourth, right?
Yeah, third, fourth.
Yeah, I think that's fucking really good considering how underutilized I'd say Boomage is at the moment.
Yeah.
Like I honestly think maybe if they had Edward, they probably would have been in the final or even won. Just because he was more drilled into the roster. I feel like that Boomage's impact was so underwhelming that if they had all 5 people popping off, it would have been, I don't know. I reckon they would have made finals or won. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I did say in the last episode that they were going to win. They didn't win, so I didn't clip that and put that on Twitter because it's not useful anymore. That's very unfortunate for me. So we'll go straight to the finals here. Vitality versus Liquid. It was the 3-1. Again, Vitality, they look good on Dust 2, but I think the rest of them, it was all Liquid. Very dominant on the last map. Very dominant on Overpass. Close on Inferno, but still, it was pretty dominant. Vitality started coming back, and then Liquid kind of finished it out, right? So, then, obviously, in the post-match interview, I think people were talking about, okay, what is this the Liquid era now? And I think you could probably say, with them winning 4 events in a row and doing what some people considered impossible, yeah, you probably would say it is their era. But do you think it will last as long as the Liquid one? The Astralis one? Because I know that Stewie said he wanted it to be the longest of all time, but for whatever reason, whenever I look at that Liquid lineup, I don't know about you, but I just don't really see a team that's going to be as dominant as Astralis was.
Yeah. I think it's hard really to emulate that. Even when people were comparing Astralis to like the NIP era, I feel like you kind of just have to take your own stride into it and like getting each win, each tournament, just having form in those periods of time is more important than thinking about the bigger picture. I feel like every team that's had an era, like quote unquote, is sort of taking those short-term things, and then people look at the big picture. Like they're never just going to be like, all right, we're going to fucking win 80 games in a row. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like that is just unrealistic. You're gonna miss your mark on the short term if you're thinking too much about the long term. I feel like the long term is more of a byproduct of teams who are really, really efficient in the short term. So I think that they could have an era because of how they're performing and they're sort of. They honestly could have had an era even earlier. I saw someone mention how they only I think it was Forum actually on the casting desk. He was saying that they almost were in contention for that Grand Slam earlier. Like they could have been Astralis in that because of all the second place they were getting. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And that's obviously something that as he mentioned that was from Twist. He thought that they were going to be in that position. But as I said, like things do often come later than you think. So now that they're having that success, I feel like it's expected almost. And for them to have their own era is definitely on the cards because they could have been Astralis. You know what I mean?
Definitely. Well, fair enough. That's a nice little tie-in there to the patience aspect that I think we've touched on a bit in this podcast. But that does come up to the hour there. So I appreciate you coming on, brother. It's been a wonderful time. I think we've actually talked about some pretty interesting topics there, just in terms of the development of the scene and yourself, of course. So before we go, is there anything that you want to plug?
No, it's my Twitter really. I don't really stream it.
Yeah.
So at Noisia CSGO, yeah, it's pretty much all I use, if anything. And yeah, hopefully I think I've got ESL coming up soon. Fuck, what else? Yeah, shout out to fucking James, Jordan. Fuck, who else? I should be watching. No, that's pretty much it. I don't think anyone else watches me. No one cares. Too busy playing CS.
All right, man. Well, it's been a pleasure having you on. This has been another episode of the Temple Podcast. I'm gonna stop saying the number now because I messed up the last one. So at this point, there's no point in saying numbers anymore because I've already forgotten. So I hope you all enjoyed, and we'll catch you next time. Just before we go, I think we got something pretty special in the works for the next one. That should be good, and it's gonna involve AEF. Which you were a part of, but obviously it's going to be the AEF LAN finals. So stay tuned for what's going to happen with that one. If it all goes well, it should be some pretty dope content. So we'll catch you next time, and thanks for coming. Peace.